Sup, guys? Bad 0-2 day yesterday. The baseball total did not get there entirely, pretty much because Caden Dana gave it up early, gave up 3 home runs in the first inning plus or something, 5 runs. That just ended that total basically right away. The under was dead, unfortunately, because Andrew Heaney did his end of the bargain. I think he only gave up 3 runs. Texas's pitching staff held up their end of the bargain as they also did reuse their best relief pitchers too, which I thought might be in play in that game, and it was. What can you do about that? And then I will find much more to complain about the NFL loss there with the Tennessee Titans. I mean, we were going with history there. These rookie quarterbacks, they do not have a good track record, especially the first round, or not just first round drafted quarterbacks, but number one overall quarterbacks. None of them had won their first game in the NFL, going all the way back to David Carr with the Houston Texans back in, I don't even know when that was, the early 2000s maybe. So you were looking at a lot of history on your side there. And I think the other two rookie quarterbacks both lost their games, Jaden Daniels and, or no, was it just him? I forget. How many rookie quarterbacks played yesterday? I think there was one other one. I can't even remember now. But this was just ridiculous. There's no way that the Titans should have not only lost that game, but failed to cover. They were winning the game 17-0, like well into the second half. And if you just look at that alone, I saw some stat. I don't know how far it went back, but in the last 68 games where you had a team that was a 4 or larger underdog and they were winning the game by 17 or more at any point during the game, they covered 66 out of those 68. They were 66-1-1, and the only loss was some game back in the 2000s between Houston and Kansas City, I guess. And I'm assuming it was a way higher scoring game too, because that was the other thing that was very frustrating about this is I handicapped this game absolutely correctly. It was a low scoring game, and that should lend itself to the underdog being able to cover as well. You have a team favored by 4 or 4.5 or whatever it was, and they score no points in the entire first half, and they're still losing 17-10 with 10 minutes left in the game or something like that, or maybe even less. They have no business covering that. And I think it was still 17-16 Titans with 5 minutes to go or something around that, whatever it was, and they still wind up not covering. And it wasn't Caleb Williams. I handicapped that right too. I honestly think he's overhyped, and I don't think he's ever going to be that good. You can blast me if I'm wrong about that, but I was absolutely right about his first game. He was the worst out of the rookie quarterbacks yesterday, man. He did not have a good game at all. None of this was him. He had some plays where he was just scrambling around like a chicken with its head cut off and just was completely falling apart, getting sacked for losses. What's up, Evil Bo Weevil? Thanks for joining. I'm going to have to try to make this quick as I rant about this loss, and then I have to talk about tonight's NFL game, and then I have 2 baseball plays on a short baseball card. Oh, my God. But yeah, Caleb Williams had fewer than 100 yards passing in that game, no touchdowns, and I don't even remember what the other stat was that I saw, but his stats were just, he had below a 50% completion percentage as well. Not a good start from him, man. I was telling you that would be the case. I should have had this game right. I'm not just being biased about this, even though obviously I am, but I'm angry about it because I absolutely handicapped that game correctly and it wound up losing me money. It pisses me off. And it was like Will Levis was at fault. It's ridiculous. Like, I don't need him to be like a very good quarterback to get me the cover in that game with the way that the Bears offense completely struggled in that game. Bears defense was good. There's no doubt about that, but so was the Titans defense. All I need in that game is for Will Levis to not make a crucial mistake when it counts the most, and that's exactly what happened. And if you didn't see the game, the Titans had no offensive touchdowns. I think their only offensive scores were both field goals, and then their only touchdowns were, or actually, yeah, how many field goals do they have? I don't even remember, but their only other offensive score, their only other scores, their touchdowns were not on offense. Their touchdowns were a blocked punt return for a touchdown, and when Tennessee was up 17-16, as I mentioned, Will Levis, he would have been better off taking the sack and just let your defense take over and try to stop the rookie quarterback at that point with 5 minutes left in the game or whatever. He tries to make some play and just moronically, I mean, he could have probably thrown it out of bounds too, but what does he do? He's in the process of getting nailed, doesn't take the sack, and he throws this horrific wounded duck right to the defense, and it's a pick six. They just return it for a touchdown. Absolutely ridiculous. I am, very, very angry about it. Completely ridiculous. Chicago Bears, 24 points scored, and basically none of them were on offense. They were all through field goals and defensive and special teams touchdowns. That is not the way the teams should be covering point spreads like that. That should have been a cover for Tennessee. No question about that. Ridiculous. And that ruined my weekend because I was looking good. I didn't even talk about Saturday yesterday, but Saturday was decent. I had a 3-1 college football day on the show. That went well, and it was 3-0 until Texas Tech decided to just have a horrific game in the late game. But I wasn't too mad about that. It was still a decent day. The baseball play did lose on Saturday as well, which is frustrating. Baseball has been bad, and I'm going right back to the well with 2 more baseball totals today. So we're going to continue to lose. Let's get into today, man. That only took 6 minutes. That wasn't too bad. You guys know I do have a play on the New York Jets plus 4.5, and it looks like the best you can probably get on this now is 4. This line has dropped a little bit further, down to 4, maybe even 3.5 at some spots. 49ers remain the public team, 58% of the tickets. Looks like they have 60% of the cash right now. I'm not too concerned about that. I'm not totally convinced about that. I do think that there is a decent amount of professional action coming in on the Jets side here, and I agree with it. As I mentioned on the show yesterday, I think the spot makes sense for the Jets because for a couple of reasons that are just historic kind of angles here that you can look at where the 49ers are the Super Bowl losing team. And I mentioned this in my NFL video, so you can go watch that for more analysis, even though I'm going to mention a couple of things I did not mention in that video. Super Bowl losing team tends to have a hangover in week 1 coming into that next season. So that's the spot the 49ers are in. They don't tend to cover the spread at a great rate. They tend to be overvalued for the most part. That's why. So they're usually going to be a favorite of some kind, and they're having to cover a number. So that is the case here. Then you also look at the fact that historically, as I mentioned on my video, when you have teams that did not make the playoffs the prior year in week 1 up against teams that did make the playoffs, the team that did make the playoffs again tends to be overhyped for that reason. Usually they're a favorite, and they don't cover the spread at a very good rate. So I believe it's actually profitable to just blindly play the team that didn't make the playoffs. Maybe only if they're an underdog, I forget, but of course they are here. So those are angles working towards the Jets. And then the fact that this should be a defensive matchup, dude. The Jets, they were all defense last year. And this is the reason why the public's going to be on the 49ers, because they made the Super Bowl last year. They were the better team. There's no question about that. And because they have the better offense out of the two teams. They have a very balanced offensive attack, that's for sure. And they're a balanced team because their defense is also quite good. But the offense is what draws the public attention more. And all the public saw was 49ers were able to score a ton last year, had a great offense, and the Jets were the opposite and had a horrific offense. So that's going to draw the public to the 49ers side as well. But when you're taking an underdog, taking the points, it's better for you to have a defensive matchup. And this total is crashing. It's down from 46 to 43.5 with juice on the under, even though we do see 58% of tickets on the over, but 75% of the cash on the over. Like I said in the primetime game last night, which I think did stay under the total despite it going into overtime, that line looked too high to me. And these primetime games, especially in week 1, you tend to get more defense right out of the gate. And in these games that have more meaning, you tend to see more defense and offenses trying to get their rhythm and also playing it close to the vest and not wanting to make mistakes either. And the public likes to come in on overs, and they're coming in more on these primetime games. So the under tends to be the better way to look in these primetime games. But I'm not playing the under here, although I would, I guess, still lean to the under. But the fact that this is probably going to be a lower scoring game, as is being indicated here, and we know that both teams are good on defense, that also lends itself towards the points being worth more, and you want to take a look at the underdog in situations like that more often than not as well. So that is also what I'm doing here. Now, of course, the Jets, you got to think that their offense is not going to be as inept as it was last year. Their offense was just atrocious last year, and they still actually played fairly decently last year, and it was because their defense was one of the top defenses in football. And by the way, it should be again, because they have most of that defense is returning for the Jets, so their defense should continue to be very, very good. But their offense should be way better than it was last year because they had way too many injuries. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers missed the entire season. He is back, and even though he's a 40-year-old, these Hall of Fame quarterbacks, when they get into that older age, they still perform at a pretty high level, dude. You can look back to Tom Brady, Brett Favre, going way back to the guy that Aaron Rodgers succeeded in Green Bay. Guys like that, Drew Brees, guys that play into their 40s. Peyton Manning, I don't think quite did it, but those other three guys, like guys that are, most of these guys that are really good and they continue to play up into their 40s, they actually still continue to play at a pretty high level. So I'm not too worried about that. And a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers should be a huge upgrade from Zach Wilson and company, okay? The Jets basically were playing without a quarterback last year. I think the Jets' offensive line was also a huge problem last year, and the Jets' offensive line should be dramatically improved this season. They kind of stacked their offensive line. They drafted, I think, at least one offensive lineman for some depth early on in the draft, and they went out and they got new guys. Of course, they're going to have to learn the system, but I think it's easier to learn protection schemes than it is to learn the other parts of the offense. So I think it's easier for those linemen to just be kind of plugged in and play. So the Jets got some pieces to build their offensive line up because they knew that was their biggest problem last year. So I think the Jets' offense should be significantly better and plugging those holes on that line. The line was terrible last year, so that should all help improve the Jets' offense. And, of course, as I mentioned on my other video, the 49ers' weakest spot last year was their defensive line, and the Jets have a very good running back. 49ers' weakest spot was their run defense specifically, and the Jets have the ability to take advantage of that with Breece Hall, who I think remains kind of underrated because the Jets' offense didn't do anything last year, but Breece Hall is one of the most talented running backs in the NFL. So they have him. They have Garrett Wilson, who is a very, very good wide receiver, who should be a very good target for Aaron Rodgers. Like, he can basically fill that Devontae Adams type. So if you think Aaron Rodgers needs that type of guy, he does have one in Garrett Wilson. I do think they went out and picked up a couple other offensive weapons as well, I believe. I think they have some other wide receivers pretty good, and I can't remember who it is now. But the Jets' offense should be improved and not just a complete, not like no-show like it was last year. 49ers, you could see them maybe not be terrific out of the gate here, man, because as I mentioned on my other show, they've had some kind of weird turmoil during the preseason here, and people are talking about the Jets' turmoil more. Like, everybody just wants to be biased against Aaron Rodgers because of his political views and whatever, which I think is BS. Trying to say that Aaron Rodgers, he missed 2 days of minicamp and he's not a team player, which I think that's just that's total BS. I don't think there's really much to that at all. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, those future Hall of Fame quarterbacks like that, they do have a little bit of leeway there as far as, like, yeah, they'll be able to take a couple days off or whatever, but he didn't miss that much of practice, or that much of the preseason, whereas on the other side, you got the 49ers, man. I mean, I did mention that Pearsall got shot, but he's a rookie, and that was an attempted robbery against him. He will miss some time, but he's also a rookie, so the 49ers didn't have him last year. So aside from, like, the fact that might motivate the 49ers a little bit to play for him, I don't think that that's going to be that significant as far as what's going to happen on the football field, unfortunately, because it is a ridiculous circumstance, and it is pretty ugly. 49ers had all that other turmoil with Brandon Ayuk, arguably their top wide receiver, looking like he might be gone from the team. That contract dispute, he was holding out for almost all of the preseason, I believe, and then he finally agreed to terms, but I think he missed, like, most of their preseason, if I remember correctly, most of camp or whatever. So, I mean, he already knows the offense, so I don't know that that's that significant, but it still shows you there's something kind of going on there. The 49ers are going to have to overcome some of this turmoil. So I actually think they're in more turmoil than the Jets. And the worst part of it for the 49ers, which I didn't even mention on my other show, is Trent Williams, who is their best offensive lineman. Everybody always overlooks the lines and the linemen. I think he held out to even more of a degree than Ayuk, and he was refusing to play as well. So I don't think he played at all, if I'm I might be mistaken, but he should be ready to go again because he knows the system. He's already been there, but he's one of their best offensive linemen. And if the headspace here of these guys, if it's not there for this first game, that could be a little bit of an issue. And he's their best offensive lineman, like I said. And as I mentioned before, even though this is a very balanced 49ers offense, but I still don't trust Brock Purdy that much. I think he's lifted up by all these really talented offensive players around him, and I think that Aaron Rodgers is actually probably the better of the two quarterbacks, even though he's 40 years old. It's just that the 49ers do have the better offense overall, of course. I'm not going to dispute that. I do think the Jets have the better defense, though, and the 49ers defense is a little bit less intact than the Jets defense is as well. The 49ers, they're going to be missing a couple of guys, and they're going to be missing Greenlaw, who was their best linebacker. And if you remember last year, Super Bowl, the 49ers were winning the game. They were playing really well, and Greenlaw was the guy who basically, I think he tore his Achilles basically just jogging back onto the field, essentially. And it was almost like we're in a simulation now, and like the simulation gods have taken over pretty much and have handed this game to the Chiefs at this point. It was such a weird injury. It was non-contact injury. You tear your Achilles just by jogging back out onto the field. Totally bizarre. He's one of the best players on San Francisco's defense, and that was like a complete turning point in the game too. San Francisco started playing much, much worse after he was gone. I don't know how significant it's going to be tonight, but Greenlaw, I believe, is still out. He's not playing in tonight's game. So we'll see how that affects the 49ers defense as well. So I like the Jets. You can go watch my NFL video as well, where I talked about that and the Titans game. I talked about the Sunday games, and they're all done now. And I think my leans were kind of 50-50 in those, but whatever. Just kind of like my pick'em pool. But for week one, I mean, I try to just go 50-50 for the most part in the pick'em pools, which pick'em pools is just hard to do anyway, because you have to pick every single game, so you're not able to pick your spots. But week one is always the toughest, and if I go like 8-8, I'm like, that's pretty good. And I'm sitting at 8-7 right now. And obviously, I have the Jets plus the points in my pools tonight, so we'll see what happens there. And I advanced in my survivor pools with Seattle yesterday. That week one is always such a minefield, man. For that survivor pool, you're never safe at all, especially in week one. It's ridiculous. Jets plus the points is the play there, though, that I have. You can probably still get +4 out there, so that's the way I'm doing it. Going to baseball, we're looking at Miami-Pittsburgh. I'm just going to try to keep this. I'm going to try to keep this quick because this is a short Monday slate here, but there aren't many scenarios that I really like here. I will say that I lean against my Red Sox, unfortunately, because Baltimore's coming off, I think, a pretty ugly home loss, and now they're able to take to the road and refocus, and they're the team that has somebody to play for. The Red Sox are effectively eliminated. They don't have anything else to play for. Baltimore does, so you could see a little bit more motivation on their side. But Cade Povich, Red Sox, I think I've only seen him once or twice. He's a young dude. He might be a rookie still, and he's been mediocre, but he has like one really bad start that's really skewing his season-long results more than it should, but he has better numbers against Boston, decent numbers against Boston, holding them to a batting average in the low 200s than Bayo has against Baltimore. Bayo has definitely struggled against Baltimore with allowing them to hit like close to 300 against them. So I don't like the Red Sox side at all here. Red Sox are down from -125 to -116. 65% of tickets on the public Baltimore side because they are the better team with the better record, but 87% of the cash on them and the line moving in their direction. So Baltimore is getting the traction there in the market. Minnesota, I believe, is returning home from a road trip where they just got swept at Kansas City. It was a huge sweep for Kansas City, a huge series in general. So I would initially look to go against Minnesota on that return home spot. They're laying a pretty big price, and it's gone down a little bit, and they're public in the market, even though more of the cash looks like it's on them for whatever reason. But David Festa, aside from like one or two kind of bad starts, like I think his first couple of starts are really bad, he's actually been pretty successful as a rookie since then, and he has never been seen before by a weak-hitting Anaheim lineup. So I'm not going to fade Minnesota in a spot like that where Festa probably has the advantage in the starting pitching matchup. Detmers, on the other hand, he's shown glimpses of being a good pitcher, but Minnesota actually has good offensive numbers against him. So you got Detmers has bad numbers against Minnesota, and Festa never been seen before by Anaheim. So not a situation starting pitching-wise where I would want to actually fade. Where I would want to fade Minnesota in that one. In Kansas City, they're coming off a big series. They just swept Minnesota. Huge series for them. So normally I'd say they're in a letdown spot. And Brady Singer is pitching, and his numbers against the Yankees are not good. But the Yankees are returning home from a road trip, so they're not in a great spot either. So I'm just going to stay away from that, too. Public looks like they're evenly split on that one, and more of the cash actually coming in on Kansas City, even though Rodon actually has the better numbers against Kansas City than Singer does against the Yankees. Let's move to today. And I don't know if I forgot to mention it because I was saying that Texas held up their end of the bargain, at least in my underplay yesterday. Texas did use their best relief pitchers again yesterday, 2 days in a row, so they did wind up still being available. So their pitching staff did hold up their end of the bargain yesterday. But let's look at these totals. First total I'm going to play is the under in Miami and Pittsburgh here. That's where I'm going with this one. This is a type of spot where I look to play an under, even though I don't know if you're getting a ton of value because it's Paul Skeens pitching in this game. Everybody knows that he's really good. But if you can get under 7.5 in this one, I've found it at even money. 7 is a key number. 7.5. You get the hook on that in baseball because 7 is what you need to break the 3-3 tie. If you can get under 7.5, I still think that's a decent number in a game like this. Even though it is Paul Skeens, this line looks like it's moved down from 7 juice to the over to 7.5, juice to the over to 7.5 juice to the over, a little bit less so, even though I do see 50% of the tickets evenly split on the under, but 55% of the cash on the over for the time being. So I don't like that there seems to be a little bit of a cash discrepancy on the over, but maybe that'll shift throughout the day. I'm not sure. I'm just looking at the pitching matchups here, man. Both of these relief staffs didn't pitch a lot in yesterday's games. So this is a new series. These teams are starting a new series here. So they faced other opponents yesterday, but they didn't use much of their bullpens at all. I think both teams had a deep start. Pittsburgh from Jared Jones and Miami got a nice start. I was wrong about that from Edward Cabrera. They both went like 7 innings. So both bullpens only used like 2 relief pitchers, I think. So they're both very much intact. And I think they both won by fairly large margins, so they didn't really have to use their like better relievers either. So the bullpens are decently intact coming into this game, so I like that. And then, of course, we have to look at the starting pitching matchup, and this is a pitching matchup where neither starter has ever been seen before by these opposing lineups, man, and they're both rookies with decent stuff, so that's the type of spot where I like to look for an over. Valente Bayozo, 3.78 ERA, 1.28 whip. The whip's a little bit high for my liking. He's pitching for Miami, and he hit a little speed bump here after he was pitching well. He had one bad start against the Red Sox, and then he didn't allow more than 2 earned runs in any start for a while up until he got hit around by the Cubs, and that wasn't a good start for him. He walked 5 guys, which was a bit unlike him, and that's kind of skewing his walk rate up. That worries me a little bit because he has been walking kind of too many guys, but the Chicago Cubs were hitting pretty well at that point, and then he had a bad start in Colorado, in high elevation. I'm not going to be too concerned about that. I think you can kind of throw that one out because it's just an environment that pitchers have to adapt to. And Colorado's kind of built to hit specifically at Coors Field, so I'm not going to take away much from that. And then Bayozo bounced back and shut out Washington for 6 innings, even though they're not a great offense. He had only 1 strikeout and 2 walks, so that is concerning to me a little bit. It tends to be a little bit of a red flag there when that happens, but he only allowed 3 hits as well. So all in all, it was a pretty decent start and a decent bounce back for him. So I do consider him to be a pretty good young pitcher, and I'm not even going to switch to it. You can trust me on this. The Pittsburgh has never faced Bayozo before. And then on the other side, Paul Skeens, I don't even know if I have to go into it. 2.13 ERA this rookie season, 0.98 whip. I mean, this guy's been dominating this season. He's been dropping off a little bit just because he throws so hard that maybe he's running out of steam a little bit, but still 142 strikeouts and 114 innings pitched, only 82 hits allowed, 30 walks allowed on the season. He's been a little bit less dominant, but he's still been pitching well. He did walk 4 guys in his most recent start against the Cubs, so kind of similar to Bayozo in his last start, but they still didn't allow any runs. Neither of them did, so Paul Skeens, I mean, he's still pitching pretty consistently. He's still Paul Skeens. And some of these lineups like Chicago had already seen him multiple times, I think, prior to that at this point. Skeens, however, has never been seen by Miami before. So you have a guy who you know is maybe the best rookie pitcher in baseball, dominant stuff, and you got an opposing lineup that's never seen him before. I'm going to go with that. So in both cases here, neither of these starters have ever been seen before by these opposing hitters, and they both have decent stuff. So that is an advantage to the pitcher on both sides here because the hitters have to adjust. And neither of these teams have very good offenses either. So that factors in here as well. And they both have to adjust to these new starting pitchers that they've never seen before. So that's that. That is the handicap on that one. That's an under 7.5 in that one. Bayozo, by the way, I don't like his strikeout walk ratio, as I mentioned, 33-17. That's not great. Not a high strikeout rate either, and too many walks. But he's only left 44 hits in 47 2/3 innings. He hasn't been allowing a ton of runs. And the home runs, basically all of them came in those two bad starts, one at Coors Field and one against the Cubs. So I think he's not that bad a pitcher. And it's going to take both offenses to really kind of get this thing to go over the total. So I like the under in that one. And then in the other one, I actually like an over, which maybe I shouldn't be playing overs like this, because one thing is the bullpens worry me a little bit in the over in this one, but I'm gonna go over. Cubs Dodgers. I found this at a straight up 9.5, even though I'd rather get over a number that's lower than 9.5. But this number does look like it's going up and up and up. It looks like it opened at 9, which would have been better. I only saw it at 9.5 straight up, but now it looks like it's 9.5 juice to the over. I see 80% of the cash on the over because it's a Dodgers game. Public's going to be coming in on the over on a game like that. 90, and because they don't like the starting pitchers either, and neither do I. That's part of the handicap. It's most of the handicap, and 97% of the cash looks like it's on the over. However, I don't know about that really, but it does look like the cash discrepancy is on the over, and it looks like the line has been moving up on the over. Neither of these teams used a lot of their relief pitchers yesterday, so that does worry me slightly that both bullpens are decently intact, but I'm not sure how good the Cubs bullpen really is. I think the Dodgers defense is decent, but I still think that this game could have a tendency to go over, especially if the starting pitchers are bad enough that the bullpens have to be gone too early on. I'm playing the over here. This starting pitching matchup looks very conducive to it. Kyle Hendricks is pitching for Chicago, and I think he's at the end of his rope, man, even though he's not that old at 34. 6.6 ERA this year, 1.51 whip. He's been their worst starting pitcher, and he's just not cutting it. He's coming off a decent start against Pittsburgh, bouncing back from a really horrendous start against Pittsburgh, but he still hasn't been pitching well recently. 6.23 ERA in 4 starts in August, only had 9 strikeouts across that. He was not going deep into those starts, and he walked 6 as well. 25 hits allowed in 17 1/3 innings pitched there. His start against Pittsburgh most recently was decent, but still, he has not been pitching well. The whole season, he just hasn't. 74-33 strikeout walk ratio and 130 hits allowed and 20 home runs allowed and 107 2/3 innings pitched. That's not going to cut it. Low strikeout rate, very high hit rate. He's been getting hit around badly. Too many home runs allowed, too many walks allowed. Bad stats for Hendricks. And then up against the Dodgers, that doesn't change in a big 112 at-bat sample size. Dodgers have 4 home runs off him, a bunch of extra base hits off him, 15-7 strikeout walk ratio, so a lot of walks too, although most of them are Freddie Freeman. It's a 295 average for Dodgers hitters against him, an 818 OPS. So Hendricks has very much struggled against the Dodgers hitters. And then on the other side, Walker Buehler is a guy I've mentioned before. He's been really struggling for the Dodgers this year. He had some good seasons for the Dodgers up through 2021, basically, and then he started declining in 2022 a bit, even though he only made 12 starts that year. Then he missed all of last season, trying to make the comeback this year, and he's been kind of back and forth between majors, minors, whatever. I think maybe he's been hurt too, but his numbers have just been really atrocious this season. 5.67 ERA, 1.61 whip, 45-20 strikeout walk ratio is no good either. 67 hits allowed and 54 innings pitched. He's just been bad overall this season. He's been struggling. He's allowed 13 home runs too, which is really high. So both of these pitchers have been really, really struggling. Too many hits allowed, too many walks allowed, not a high strikeout rate either. I mean, you look on the surface, it's like, oh, okay, well, he hasn't allowed that many runs in these recent starts, 3-3, 2-2. Yeah, but he also went fewer than 5 innings in the first 3 of those, and then he went exactly 5 in his most recent against a very weak Anaheim lineup. So I'm not sure that that's a sign of, I don't think that that signals that he's turning things around, really, because Anaheim is just not very good. And you see he had some other starts this season that were decent, and then he began to struggle again anyway. He's been struggling recently. Besides that, in August, those 3 starts that I mentioned, he only went 12 innings across the 3 starts, 8.8 strikeout walk ratio, 6 ERA, 16 hits allowed. None of that is good. And up against who's he facing? What am I saying? Up against the Chicago Cubs, his numbers are, I would say they're mediocre and not that huge a sample size, 31. Does have an 8.3 strikeout walk ratio and only 1 extra base hit allowed, a double, but they've hit 290 off him, so their batting average is pretty good off him, but the OPS is a little bit low at 676, so he's been okay against the Cubs, but I think a lot of that was when he was a better pitcher than he is this season, so he's been pitching poorly this season, so that's basically it, man. That's the handicap. I think that's going to do it for me. Those are the plays today. So I have the New York Jets plus 4.5 in the NFL. In baseball, 2 totals. Miami, Pittsburgh under 7.5 at plus 100. I found it. And Chicago Cubs, LA Dodgers over 9.5 at right at the minus 110 price there. So I want to get back on track in baseball because these baseball plays have been bad. Mostly the totals have been bad recently. I got to turn this around, man. My sides have been better than the totals recently. I had a really nice run with the totals, especially the unders earlier in the season, and now it's just been bad. Not a good baseball season overall, and I need to turn this entire year around in a hurry. So let's have a winning night tonight, man. Come on, let's get it done. I had 5 straight winning days before yesterday, so let's get it. It should have been at least a very small loss because that Titans loss never should have happened. Have a good one, man. Let's kick off the week correctly. And follow Tower Gang. I'm Tower Gang Toad. Follow me on Twitter. And follow the Tower Gang podcast, the most offensive podcast on the planet. You can find us on all the things pretty much, and you can subscribe to us on Patreon and give us some money, and you get extra content and stuff. Patreon.com/TowerGangPod or whatever. Peace.